You want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
You can't handle the truth!
Well, we're giving you the Michigan Sports Truth, the show that reveals facts, truth, research, and statistics and never messes around. With your hosts, Taylor Phillips, Ed Smith, Frank Vashner, and Buck Geno. We lay down the entire truth about everything regarding your Detroit and Michigan sports teams, no matter how uncomfortable they may be. No junk, no entertainment, no homerism, no coddling, no pop culture, no opinions, no shilling, and no fluff. Follow me, Taylor Phillips, on Twitter at DT2Phillips with 2 L's. Follow Ed Smith on Twitter at EdSmith313. Follow Frank Vashner at Frank_Vashner, VAJCNER. And follow Buck Geno on Twitter at BuckGeno3rd. Also like our Facebook page, The Michigan Sports Truth, and join our Facebook group with the same name. The hosts of the Michigan Sports Truth podcast do not take any suggestions or criticism from any member of its audience on how it should be run. It is up to the host to decide what they want to cover. They also do not intend to be any amount of popular in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Additionally, the views of the audience, right or wrong, do not reflect the actual truth revealed on this program.
And welcome to episode 296 of the Week in Review. Taylor Phillips and Buck Geno here, just about to wrap up the year of 2017. Not very much to recap except the Lions, Chippewas in the Idaho Potato Bowl against Wyoming, Pistons and Red Wings Week in Review. Red Wings are back to their losing ways, losing 2 straight, by the way, and Ken Holland digging a deeper hole. But, Buck, how was your Christmas?
Well, aside from the multiple shovelings, it was good. How about you?
Yeah, it was good, except I had a head cold, but I fought through it.
Yeah, sounds like you're still trailing in, but playing hurt.
Yep. So, that being discussed, let's go to work.
Touchdown, Detroit Lions!
The Lions lose to the Cincinnati Bengals on the road 26-17. Quite a few mistakes, and they proved costly. Stafford throwing an interception while he was hit by Vontaze Burfict. The Lions let the Bengals get away with it, and the Lions, as a result, are eliminated from playoff contention. And that was against Jim Caldwell. But let's recap the game first before we get to Caldwell. The Lions didn't provide much offense, and they allowed a game-winning field goal and an insurance touchdown in the end, and time ran out.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the whole game, I mean, the first half, it was ugly. The weather wasn't terrible. I mean, it's December, it's Cincinnati, so, you're not talking about optimal conditions. At the same time, it was not something that should have impeded them in the loss. They had 3 of their top offensive linemen out, so excuse away for that. But when they had a healthy offensive line, they couldn't run the ball. They couldn't run the ball again in that game, and Jim Caldwell punting twice on 4th down and short. And the second time in the fourth quarter, they were going to go for it on 4th down, had a false start. Sam Martin went back to punt, and then they got it running into the kicker penalty, so they got to try it again and actually made the first down, but were unable to come away with any points in that drive. And, I'm sorry, they were able to score on that drive, but then when the Bengals drive back down the field and kicking, as you mentioned, a go-ahead, which ended up being the game-winning field goal, and then coming back on the drive, what really position, and the Bengals were pretty much resigned to the fate of kicking another field goal. They were going to run the football, try to evaporate all of the Lions' timeouts, and go up by 5. But the Lions' defense couldn't stand up to the task and ended up giving up a touchdown, which cemented their fate after the Bengals kicked the extra point, making it a 9-point game, and essentially ending it at that point. Just a disappointing loss for the Lions, simply because that's a team in the Bengals that get housed by the Bears 2 weeks ago. They've been outscored 61-17 in their last 2 games, and that's a game that if you're going to consider yourself a playoff contender, that you have to win not only by a large margin, but going away. The Bengals have nothing to play for. Marvin Lewis has put his 2 weeks in, so to speak, and he'll be done at the end of this season. So the Bengals literally having nothing to play for. Geno Bernard goes for over 100 yards for the first time in over 2 years. It was just a pitiful performance, and it's really brought to light the question now of, should Jim Caldwell continue to be the Lions coach? And we'll hit on that a little bit later in the show, but it was just a really bad performance by a team that absolutely needed to have something other than that. And there's no denying that there were guys that were hurt. There were guys that were playing banged up. But you're in week 16 of the NFL football season. That's going to happen with every team. So to say that the Lions' injuries wasn't a factor isn't really true. But at the same time, everybody's got issues with injuries. Joe Mixon, the starting running back for the Bengals, goes out in the first half with an injury, leaving them with only Geno Bernard as their only real running threat, and he goes for over 100 yards. The Lions just looked, again, confused and unsure on offense, and it was just, again, a bad performance that really has kind of come to be a microcosm of the Lions in Jim Caldwell's tenure, and that is when the chips are down, that he plays a very conservative style, that he plays not to lose. And by doing that, and when you do that at any level of football, but especially in the NFL, it is really tough to come out on top. And the Lions too many times have done that in Jim Caldwell's 4-year tenure now as head coach. And when the beat writers are calling for Jim Caldwell to be fired, you know it's really in dire straits, because that's something that really gets reserved for people that really aren't getting the job done. And you look at the Lions, who, had they won out, still would have needed some help at 10-6. But now going into the finals game against the Packers with a record of 8-7, and that game now not really a slam dunk as far as winning the game at Ford Field. They could end up at 8-8 or even 9-7, but still outside looking in on the playoff picture. And Caldwell has reached his ceiling. Jim Caldwell is a better coach than what they had previously, but his style is not that is going to win you football games. He's going to coach you to a point, and he's gotten them in the games that maybe they should have won, but his strategy is never that of a coach that is confident in what he has. And it's amazing to me that it's a team that has really shaped itself around Matthew Stafford, now the highest paid player, the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, and you're not confident in him. Why would you give him all that money and not have confidence in him to make the plays? Now, I know he's hurt, and I know that their offensive line is banged up, so he's not going to be able to do 7-step drops and just wing it downfield. But for Pete's sake, you're paying him a lot of money, and you're not using him effectively. And Jim Caldwell and Jim Bob Cooter are the main perpetrators in that disaster that they call an offense. And it's really just been a culmination of the Lions getting to a certain point and teasing the fans enough that they could be good if ands or buts aren't good enough. And Jim Caldwell said as much today in his press conference. They're not good enough to be where the fans think they should be. And yes, that's partly on the players, but that's mostly on the coaching staff, because they are coaching them into a shell, and they're not letting them take chances. They're not letting them try to win the game and do what they've been paid to do, which is play and win in football games. So, with him losing that, or with the Lions losing that game, and Jim Caldwell really coming to the podium today at his press conference, resigned to the fate that they've not made the playoffs. It's just a real disappointment. And I think that Lions fans, when they started this season with the free agent pickups that they got, the players that they had coming back, people really thought that they would be able to make that next step after last year's debacle. And Jim Caldwell, who's had chance upon chance to get this team to the next level, certainly has not been able to do that. So we'll see what happens here. Obviously, he won't be fired this week because there doesn't really do any good if you fire him today or if you fire him a week from now. But that said, I really don't see how they move forward with Jim Caldwell for another year. It'll be interesting to see what head coaching prospects are out there. Many people say that Bob Quinn's going to target Matt Patricia and or Josh McDaniels from the Patriots staff. But when you look at the Patriots, they may not be willing to let those guys go. They're under contract, and they don't have to let them spread their wings, so to speak. So if that were to occur, Bob Quinn's going to have to find some other candidates. And I am always of the theory that you should not fire your head coach unless you have somebody better already lined up. Now, that's not to say Jim Caldwell is a great NFL coach. He has proven time and time again that he's not. But at the same time, with the level of success the Lions have had in the last 4 years, and it's one of the worst franchises in NFL history as far as win-loss is concerned, you can't argue with the fact that he has taken them to a winning record 3 out of his 4 years, or at least above 500. We'll see what happens on Sunday. So it's a real interesting time now for the Lions because on paper it looks like you should fire him and find another head coach that may take them to that next step. But again, look at what they have coming back. Look at the decisions that they're going to have to make on the roster. And free agency this year, they went out and spent all the money they could. Are you going to do that again? They have decisions to make on Ziggy Ansah, Eric Ebron, and a couple other players that are going to be vital, perhaps, to the success of that team next year. And you look at the contracts that they have still on the books, and it's going to be an interesting offseason for the Lions, whether or not they fire Jim Caldwell. I don't expect them to drag it out. I would expect that if they were going to do so, they'll do it right after the season ends. But the longer that they talk about Jim Caldwell not being fired is the probability that he won't be until later on. So it'll be a situation that bears watching, and I think that for the Lions, not only are they deeply disappointed with the loss against Cincinnati, but also disappointed on how this season really went for them because they thought they were going to take that next step. Everybody that had watched the team over the last 3 years, people thought that that was going to happen. And the NFC was a little bit more competitive this year. When you look at the teams that made the playoffs, there was a lot of good teams in the NFC, and they could have been 10-6 and missed the playoffs. So when you look at it under that microscope, Jim Caldwell did what he could do as far as the players that he had, but he didn't coach them above what they're able to do, and that's what you're looking for NFL head coaches to do. And there's no better test case than the LA Rams, who last year were brutal. They're terrible. And Sean McVay gets hired, and now they're in the playoffs as the second seed. I don't think they're going to hire Sean today and bring them right to 12-4 and get into the playoffs. But I mean, you've got a team that literally is. At times, you feel like they're being handcuffed to Jim Caldwell's coaching and style because they look like they have more potential, but they've never really been able to show it. And it's disappointing if you're a Lions fan. I just really don't know what they're going to do next. Everybody thinks that Jim Caldwell is going to be fired, but I would not say that's going to be a sure thing at all. And we'll see what happens here in the offseason because I know that Bob Quinn probably would prefer a head coach change, but that he's not the guy that makes the only decisions. You got to remember that Martha Ford was really the driving force behind giving him another contract extension, which was for this year, and then an option year after that has been reported by many outlets now. So you got to look at it as, who are they going to bring in, and is that person going to make them any better? And if you're a Lions fan, you'd hope that they were able to do that. But at the same token, if they bring in another head coach and they go 6-10 next year, then you're looking at moving guys around, players around, and you're kind of back to where you started. So it's an interesting time. I think that for the Lions to succeed, I think they would have to make a coaching move, but it doesn't necessarily mean they will. And now we just have to watch them for the last week in a meaningless game against the Packers and find out who's going to be around next year.
Yeah. So, let me get a sip of water here. So, we heard from Joseph Hayes that Jim Caldwell being on the hot seat was, let me see here. Hot seat tied to racism, but that's not the case. The racism part was forced him to stay.
I think it's quite the opposite. I think he's been given chance over chance because the organization doesn't feel like trying to make an excuse that they're getting rid of a head coach simply because he's black. I think he's been given extra chances because the Lions want to dodge that question. I'm not saying that he doesn't deserve where he needs, or deserve the spot he is at right now, but where he needs to be is not a head coaching position. And time again, he's proven as a head coach that he is not a great head coach. He's a decent coordinator. Peyton Manning has talked about Jim Caldwell when he was in Indianapolis as the quarterback's coach is really helping him along, but that doesn't mean that he's going to be a great head coach. And I think that we've seen it now proven in the crucible of the NFL time and time again that Jim Caldwell is not a head coach. And he can be a coordinator, he can be a quarterback's coach, he can be a valued contributor to a professional football staff. But as the head person making all the decisions, he has proven that he is not up to par with some of the other people that are coaching in the NFL. And again, there's not 32 great coaches. If there were, then nobody would ever get fired. So take that for what it's worth. But Jim Caldwell is not the guy that's going to take you to a Super Bowl. And everybody points to him making the Super Bowl with Peyton Manning in his first year with the Colts. That was Peyton Manning. That was Peyton Manning and a decent defense taking them all the way and then losing to New Orleans in that Super Bowl. After that, after Peyton Manning got hurt, Jim Caldwell was less than ordinary. And the record showed it, and he was shown the door in Indianapolis. He went to Baltimore to be the offensive coordinator. And he was even on the brink, perhaps, of being fired from the Baltimore job when the Lions made him their head coach. So it's hard because in the NFL you have a lot of recycling. You have guys that do the same thing in different spots for 3 or 4 years at a time, and that's kind of the formula. But you're seeing it now with guys that have been hired as fresh faces, so to speak. Doug Peterson with the Eagles, Sean McVay with the Rams, even Sean McDermott of the Bills, who had them in the playoff hunt for quite a while. Sometimes a fresh face is better. And I think that if you're going to be looking for a head coach, experience doesn't necessarily have to come with that. I know that people are talking about Josh McDaniels. I think I would lean towards somebody else just because of what he was not able to do in Denver when his first 10 years as a head coach came around. That said, it's going to be a hard decision because, like I said, if you're going to fire somebody, you got to have somebody better lined up, or at least somebody that you believe to be better. And you're talking about Matthew Stafford, who's gone past the age of 30 now, and he's going to be on the back end. He's got a big contract, so he's going to be there for a while. And you're now going through the prime of another player in franchise history that, truthfully, could be considered for the Hall of Fame. Now, you look at Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson, to otherworldly talents. I don't think Stafford's on that level, but by God, I think that he'd be able to be at least a serviceable quarterback on a better team and maybe take them to some playoff wins. But he has not been able to do so in Detroit because of the malfunctions on the other side of the ball and the coaching or the lack of coaching that he's received since Jim Caldwell's taken over. So I think that it's going to be tough for the Lions to move on, but I also think it's going to be necessary because I don't think that they're going to get any better than what they are right now with him at the helm. And we'll see how it shakes out. We'll see who gets fired and who doesn't. There's a lot of people that are obviously rumored to be ready to be let go as soon as the season ends on Sunday night, but who gets let go and why they get let go? Are they going to be a good fit for a team right now that, if you're talking about the Lions, is still on the outside looking in as far as probably the top echelon of NFL talent? I mean, they are what they are. They are in the middle of the pack. They're better than average. And to find a coach to take them from better to average to at least a pretender to the Super Bowl, that would be a step up. But again, you risk the converse of that happening, and that's them regressing and finding another, kind of growing into another coach's system and working through a little bit of growing pains there. And it's tough. I'm thinking that for the Lions to get better, it's not really about personnel. Yeah, there are guys that make mistakes, but every NFL team makes mistakes. Even the best players make mistakes. When you look at the Lions overall this year, everything that has gone wrong for them, or almost everything, has really come down to coaching and strategy. And that's kind of a really fine look at what's happened to them this year. But when you look at that team, you can't point at one player and say, boy, if they didn't have this guy, they'd be up shit's creek without a paddle, because that's not true. Matthew Stafford playing hurt again this year. They had 3 of their offensive line out against the Bengals. They really haven't had a continuous offensive line the entire year due to injury. They've been shuffling guys around, yet they still were, up until Sunday, 8-6 with a chance to sneak into the playoffs. And when you look at that, you get so close as a team, and it's frustrating for those guys that are playing that game, because they feel that they're ready to make that next step. They feel that they're ready to contend, yet the coaches don't have enough confidence in them to employ the strategy that will get them there. And I think that's the most frustrating part for the players, and you can sense it in the comments that are coming from guys like Darius Slay, Golden Tate, and so on and so forth the last couple of weeks, that they feel that they're ready. They feel they have a good team, but the coaches have hamstrung them and put them in this little box that they want them to perform in, and it just isn't going to be enough to get them to the playoffs. And obviously, it's been proven this year that it won't get them into the playoffs.
Yeah, that's very true. Speaking of the end of the season, the Lions wrap up their season at home at Ford Field against the Green Bay Packers. The Packers will have to play without Aaron Rodgers again, because he's out for the rest of the season with season-ending surgery on his collarbone after the Packers were eliminated from the playoffs. So that gives the Lions a chance to, just for the hell of it, to sweep the Packers in the season series. It doesn't mean anything, but it's still a chance. But they'll have to.
I mean, and they're paid to play, so they're going to come out and they're going to play with pride, because that's what you do when you do a job, is you do it to the best of your ability. And it's going to be disheartening because there's not going to be really any reward for it per se, but I don't expect the Lions to come out and just collapse. That said, we'll see what the coaching staff does, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of a strategy they employ against the Packers, because when they took the road trip to Lambeau on Monday Night Football, and really just pantsed them at Lambeau. I know Brett Hundley was playing quarterback by then, and he's not very good, but the Lions pantsed them.
Yeah.
And players, anybody. You don't like that, getting embarrassed at home. So there's a little bit of revenge factor for the Packers. Not as much now because they can't spoil the Lions' possible playoff trip. It's going to be one of those games that it's going to be a meaningless game, but the Packers are going to put everything out there. They're not going to leave anything else behind because it is their last game too, and there are guys that are playing for contracts. It's just a fact that happens with every NFL team, regardless if you're the Browns at 0-15 or the Packers at, I think they're 6-9 or whatever they are. There's guys that are playing for contracts, whether it be with that team or somebody else. Everything is on film, and coaches notice that, talent evaluators notice that. So I expect the Packers to give it whatever effort they have in their tanks. And for the Lions, it's just going to be another meaningless home finale, which unfortunately for them has happened way too often in recent times.
Lions will have to play without T.J. Jones, their wide receiver. He's on the injured reserve with a shoulder injury. Cornerback Darius Slay selected to the AFC-NFC Pro Bowl. So that's pretty much Lions now. We transition to college football.
Touchdown, Central Michigan!
Central Michigan Chippewas got destroyed by the Wyoming Cowboys in the Idaho Potato Bowl, 37-14.
What is that? Are you kidding me?
I mean, we expected the Chippewas to manhandle the Wyoming Cowboys, but the opposite obviously happened. Shane Morris threw a John O'Corn type of interception. For example, their defense did not show up at all in the first half. They showed up a little bit in the second half, but their offense, man, it stunk the entire game.
Yeah, it was bad. The one thing I will say for the defense is the offense kept giving Wyoming the ball. So it was a little tough for the Chippewas defense, but just a disappointing end to what really, when you looked at it from a wide perspective, wasn't the greatest year for Central, but they somehow ended up 8-4, a big win against Northern Illinois in their regular season finale. And you thought they might build off that with some momentum. There was a lot of questions whether Josh Allen, the heralded prospect from Wyoming, would play. Not only did he play, but he played well.
Yeah.
And Shane Morris did not. And plenty of turnovers. I mean, when you turn the ball over, what was it, 7 times, 8 times?
Oh.
You're not going to win a football game. I don't care who you are. And Wyoming, I thought, showed some restraint in only scoring 37 points because Central Michigan just played one of their worst games in a long time. And it's disappointing to do that in a bowl game, especially for Shane Morris, who was the last game of his college career, who had really played after some rocky beginnings. It started to round into form and really play some decent football. And it's not a good thing for Central just because of the seniors that are leaving. It's a bad taste in their mouth. But again, I don't want to say it's a meaningless bowl game, but it's not something that really matters in the grand scheme of things. They're not going to look at it and say, well, we lost Wyoming. Our whole year was down the tubes. But it really took a lot of the luster off of what they had accomplished against Northern Illinois in their regular season finale. That said, Wyoming came out and they did what they had to do. And like I said, Josh Allen, who they didn't know if he was going to play or not, came out guns a-blazing. And for all of his foibles as far as accuracy goes, he was able to lead the Cowboys to a couple of scoring drives in the first half, aided by Central Michigan turnovers, and that really was the game.
Yep. Chippewas, before then, signed head coach John Bonamigo to a 5-year extension to remain as their football head coach through 2022, and that's a good move because the Chippewas, like we did not expect, finished 8-4 in the regular season, 8-5 in the entire season. They finished strong in the regular season with big wins over Toledo and beat Western, yep, and Northern Illinois.
And they beat Ohio. I mean,
yeah,
they beat the team
on the road,
yeah, the MAC championship game. I mean,
yeah,
it was up and down, and that's like I said. I mean, when we did our preview, Central Michigan we thought could go anywhere from 4-8 to 9-3. I mean, it was really that kind of season for Central. They played awful, and at home until the last game of the season, they were much better on the road. And all the big wins they had prior to Northern Illinois were on the road. And it was strange, but it was what it was. And they ended up 8-5, which for Central probably is a win. They're not a football school. They haven't been since Brian Kelly left, really. And I think if you took 8-5 every year for Central, I think you would take it if you were at 8-5 every year, with a chance once in a while to perhaps break through and get to a MAC championship game. And I think that's really the next step for Coach Bonamego, now that they've shown confidence in him by giving him an extension. It's probably his next goal is to get to a MAC championship game. It's tough sledding in that division, the MAC West, but Western seems to be on the way down a little bit, and with some other teams, Toledo and Northern Illinois still looming. Central's going to have to up its game a little bit, and we'll see what happens next year, but I really think for them, like I said, it was disappointing to end the season the way they did, but to go 8-5 based on a lot of the performances that we saw this year, it was mildly surprising, and probably they overachieved a little bit based on what their schedule held and how they performed.
So that leads us to our college football and the Mitten Quick Picks segment.
Time now for the college football and the Mitten Quick Picks.
First off, Michigan State Spartans against the Washington State Cougars in the Holiday Bowl Thursday at 8:30. That's going to be televised, I think, ESPN, isn't it? I can hardly remember.
Yeah, it'll be on ESPN.
So, Buck, I'll let you go first.
Well, this is an interesting matchup, simply because Michigan State plays a completely different brand of football than anything that Washington State really is accustomed to in the Pac-12 outside of Stanford. Michigan State, more of a ground-based attack and a little bit more physical up front than the Washington State Cougars really see on a game-by-game basis. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I think that Michigan State overall, I think they overachieved from what I thought they would be able to do this year, going 9-3. And that said, it should be an interesting game just because Washington State does on offense what Michigan State doesn't see a lot in the Big 12, the Big 10, and that is a lot of passing and
Touchdown, MSU!
Style of play. Washington State's defense, I think, is underrated. They've had some big performances against some good offenses this year, but they also had some disappointing games against teams that they perhaps should have beaten or at least been closer to. So that said, I'm going to go with Michigan State winning this game. And I think it's going to be a little bit more high scoring than other people would think. I'm going to go with Michigan State 38 and Washington State 28.
All right, I'm gonna pick Michigan State 42 and Washington State 27. All right, now for the Wolverines.
Touchdown, Michigan!
They play the South Carolina Gamecocks in the Outback Bowl on ESPN2 on New Year's Day at noon. Both teams are 8-4. So I'll start with you again.
Well, both teams struggled offensively, and the early lines have shown that the over-under is not high. And you look at these teams, they both relied on defense to get them where they are. Both offenses, like I said, struggled mightily at times. And when you have these type of matchups, Michigan has really, in recent vintage, performed pretty well against the SEC. I think that this will be a game for Michigan to kind of break through to next year as far as the offense is concerned, because that was their downfall this year. Defensively, I don't think that they had much to complain about. Offensively, much to complain about. And regardless of who's going to get the start, whether it be Brandon Peters or John O'Corn, right now Brandon Peters tracking to start in that game. It'll be interesting to see what kind of game plan they put together. And for South Carolina, they play in the ultra-competitive SEC, albeit in the other division, also known as not Alabama. But they went 8-4, and I think that their schedule is a little bit misleading. I think 8-4 is against the teams that they played against. It's a little bit inflated because they got to play teams like Tennessee and Florida in their division who were down this year. So I think that Michigan should be able to come out on top, but I don't think it's going to be a very, very high-scoring affair just because of what we've seen from both offenses over the course of this year. So with that all said, I think that Michigan's going to win this game. It's going to be tight, and it's going to be low scoring. I'm going to go with Michigan 20 and South Carolina 16.
I'm going to go Michigan 21, South Carolina 17. So that's our college football in the Mitten Quick Pick segment. So that's football. Now we transition to basketball and the Pistons.
Left sideline, three, and he answers.
Pistons had a really awful game at the Dallas Mavericks. They lose 110-93. Then they come back home and they beat a good Knicks team by 3, 104-101 last Friday before their Christmas break. And then they get back in action tonight, Tuesday, with a 107-83 performance over the Indiana Pacers. Andre Drummond, 21-18, plus 35. 3 for 4 from the free throw line. Reggie Jackson with 13 assists. Victor Oladipo was held to 13 points by the Pistons defense. However, they lost Reggie Jackson to a sprained right ankle. His x-rays were negative, but he'll get an MRI the following day. So this may not be long, but it's going to be our 5-question segment, so just so we can pinpoint how long we may estimate he will be gone.
Yeah, I thought they played well. They play a Pacers team that they really need to be better than, not only in their division but in the conference. And having lost the game to them earlier this season where they were up by 20-plus points and ended up losing that game, I think it was a strong statement for them to get up and keep that lead in the game before where they lost at Bankers Life Fieldhouse. And it's a little bit tough because they lose Reggie Jackson to a sprained ankle. We don't know exactly how long he'll be out, but he had been playing well. Actually, one of his better games of the season before going out with the injury. There's one position that they really couldn't afford a major injury. I think he was at the point guard position. We'll see who they insert in the starting lineup or how Stan Van Gundy moves some things around to get them through this absence of Reggie Jackson. But that said, it was a big win for the Pistons tonight. They did lose last week to the Dallas Mavericks, but the Dallas Mavericks, boy, for as bad as they are, they've beaten some good teams. They beat Toronto tonight, and Toronto's a pretty good team. So they're just kind of weird that way, but then they beat, as you mentioned, the Pistons beating the Knicks at home. The Knicks going well right now, so that was a good win for them. And then after the Christmas break, beating the Pacers, they're starting to play better, and that is no doubt owned to the fact that they're playing teams with a little bit lesser records than they were playing during that losing streak. So the Pistons have buoyed themselves back into a position of 4th place in the Eastern Conference by playing some teams that aren't as good as the Celtics and the Wizards and the other teams like the Clevelands of the Eastern Conference. So they're making hay by the sun shines, and that's what you have to do because I don't think the Pistons are a legitimate title contender, but we expected them to be better than the 7-game losing streak that they endured earlier this month. So that said, we'll see how Reggie Jackson comes along. You would hope if you're a Pistons fan, he's not out for long because, like I said, point guard's probably one of their weakest positions depth-wise. So we'll see what Stan Van Gundy does. We'll see if there's any moves made, whether it be by trading or signing or bringing guys up from the G League. We'll see what that injury entails and what they are going to do on the roster to fill that spot. But it'll be interesting, but a big win for them tonight, and they're going to have to lean on some other guys to pick up the slack. And we'll see guys like Stanley Johnson and Nish Smith play bigger roles on this team while Reggie Jackson's out.
Mm-hmm. Looks like they'll have to find a facilitator to fill Reggie Jackson's shoes until he returns. They're at the Orlando Magic Thursday at 7, then they're home against the San Antonio Spurs Saturday at 7. Then they have off until Wednesday when they play the Toronto Raptors in Air Canada Center. So,
yeah, that'll be a big test for them because Toronto obviously one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference, and they having a good backcourt, it'll be an interesting matchup for the Detroit Pistons because without Reggie Jackson, it'll be tough to match up with guys like Kyle Lowry, where even if Reggie was there, it'd be a tough game, but now with him out, it's going to be very interesting to see what they're able to do with Reggie Jackson out of the lineup against some of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. And like I said, playing some other teams that, in truth, they should beat. They get a little bit of a break schedule-wise, but it's not much. And they've gotten to fourth place in the Eastern Conference. Now the real important thing is to kind of hold serve until they can get their starting point guard back healthy and try to make a late run as February and March come.
mm-hmm. Last but not least, the Red Wings. Or the Dead Things.
Maybe at least.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You are pathetic!
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they beat the New York Islanders 6-3. They beat a good team, and then they lost to a Philadelphia Flyers team 4-3 on Wednesday Night Rivalry. Then they went into Boston and lost in regulation again 3-1. Red Wings. Let me check the schedule standings here. The Red Wings still tanking. Not only because they are losing, but Boston, the Bruins are winning more games. They hit third in the Atlantic. They had the Bruins 19-10-5 with 43 points. The Red Wings third worst, 13-15-7 with 33 points. Just 3 ahead of the Ottawa Senators, who are 11-15-8. I definitely doubt they'll catch the Buffalo Sabres for worst in the East.
Yeah, it would take a monumental effort for them to get that bad. But that said, you look at the Eastern Conference and you look at the Metro Division, which is really tight right now. There's only 9 points separating the top team, which is the Devils, and the bottom team right now, which is the Philadelphia Flyers. Then you go to the other side of the ledger, the Sabres, obviously over 50% less points than their division leaders, which is the Tampa Bay Lightning right now. The Tampa Bay Lightning, light years ahead of everybody. They're 9 points ahead of the second place team, which is the Toronto Maple Leafs. Excuse me. So the Atlantic Division is not the type of division where you can just hang around and hope to sneak into the playoffs. You have to play every night and get as many points as you possibly can. And when you look at the Red Wings over the course of December, had a lot of games at home and just weren't able to do anything with them. And that should be their downfall, is the fact that not only are they not a good team, but they're not winning games at home. And that's the hallmark of bad teams. When you're not winning games at home, they have a very favorable schedule really throughout the month of December, and they were unable to make any ground. In fact, lost considerable ground to teams in their division. So it's going to be an interesting winter in Detroit because you have them on the outside looking in, not only in the division race, but in the wild card race as well, because there's plenty of teams ahead of them. All of the teams in the Metro Division and a couple of other teams in the Atlantic Division that they have to leapfrog to even get close to the wild card. So, when do they start selling is really going to be the question, because because unless they have an amazing winning streak and other teams start to falter, they're going to miss the playoffs for a second year in a row. And not only are they going to miss the playoffs, but they'll probably do so in spectacular fashion, which really brings us to the question, is Ken Holland going to be able to survive his second year without a trip to the playoffs, especially in a brand spanking new arena, with a team that really has no direction and no way out of some really bad contracts? That's going to be the question of the whole winter is Ken Holland going to be able to survive that? Now, the fan in us would say no, we hope not, because he's really kind of ruined the team to try to basically sneak into the playoffs every year and make that a hallmark, whereas he's really taken them away from being competitive with a lot of bad contracts and bad signings and poor player management. And when you look at the team that they have, there's a lot of guys that are going to have a lot of value to some teams that are going to make a Stanley Cup run. And if you're looking to make this team better, the thing that you have to do is use those assets to make yourself better for future years. And not only guys like Mike Green and other players like Gustav Nyquist, and you really have to look at almost everybody being available, because you're not going to make the playoffs, and there's a lot of teams that will do some dumb things if they're looking to make that last piece to a cup run. And you would hope that Ken Holland can make some of those deals and pull the trigger on some really tough decisions, but I think that the history has told us that he won't, and we'll see what happens. But inarguably, they are not a playoff team.
No.
And it'll be interesting to see how they manage that through the next couple of months, because they've really gotten nowhere with the lineups they've put out there. So maybe it's finally time that they just bring in all the young guys and start to try to get back on track and make it a slow rebuilding process. Whereas other teams that have done so have already gotten back into the winning swing of things. You look at Toronto 3 years ago, they were awful. And yes, they have Austin Matthews and Michael Nylander. William Nylander, Michael Nylander's kid. But if you're going to draft guys like that, you expect it to be good. But not only has Toronto gotten great players in the draft, but they've also made smart signings and really done a nice job of building a complete team. And when you're looking at Detroit, they're kind of in that same situation that Toronto was. Bad team, bad contracts, not a lot of depth in the pipeline, and the only way to do something about that is to deal, get assets, get draft picks, and start to hammer away at building yourself back into a nucleus of good young players.
They have the New Jersey Devils coming up at Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey. The Devils, first place in the Metropolitan Division. Surprising, 21-9 and 547 points. Then they're the New York Rangers. Friday at 17.
Yeah, the Devils. I mean, you look at the New Jersey Devils, and people did not expect much out of them, but they quietly have built a decent team in there. Corey Schneider is a pretty good goaltender, and they've built around him. They've made moves. They haven't been scared to make moves. They traded their best defenseman to get Taylor Hall, and they've made some other some moves to get other guys in there. And a lot of them are younger players. They're not making moves to get old veterans in there. And they're kind of on a surprising run right now, but it's refreshing to see a team that's able to do that. And just another example of today's NHL, signing guys who are on the backside of 30 isn't going to get you to a Stanley Cup. It's not going to get you to first place. It's going to get you to the bottom. And that's the fastest way to get there, is not play young talent, not play guys who are ready to learn on the job. And that's exactly what the Red Wings have done for the last 5 or 6 years, is they have not let kids learn on the job. They have not let players mature at the NHL level, and it shows. I mean, there's a test case for teams that are not scared to play young players and get a coach in there that adheres to a good system. It's the New Jersey Devils. I mean, yeah, they probably aren't going to win the Stanley Cup this year, but they're in first place right now and almost halfway through the season, looking like a completely different team than everybody had predicted them to be, simply because of all the inexperience. But they've really played well, and it's just another harbinger of what is to come in the NHL, which is you got to lean on young guys. You've got to make those moves so that you have players that are ready for you when your current players get old or perhaps leave for bigger contracts. And you look at a team like the Pittsburgh Penguins who made back-to-back cup runs. They're in the back end of the Metro Division right now. They're tied for last, I believe, with the Flyers at 39 points. And a lot of hockey played in the last 2 years, but they don't have a lot of players in the pipeline as far as the minors are concerned. They did mortgage their future a little bit to win those back-to-back Stanley Cups, but even then, they're still better than Detroit right now. And I think that they're still in better shape with the players that they have. Even though they're struggling right now to score goals, they have a lot better nucleus, and of course they have some good players to build around. And I think that for the Detroit Red Wings, not only do they not have anything in the pipeline to speak of, they don't have anybody they can build a team around. They don't have an Evgeny Malkin. They don't have a Sidney Crosby. They don't have anybody like that. And the only way to get better is to get one of those guys. I'm sorry to tell you, but if you look at the teams that are good, they're not doing it by selecting 20th every year in the draft. It just isn't happening. So back to the old adage, you have to go and be bad before you get good. And I think for the Red Wings, hopefully that realization is sinking in. And I think that, like I've said many times on this podcast before, fans will accept it as long as there's some promise at the end of the rainbow. And for Ken Holland to continuously delay that process just makes people more frustrated with the fact that they're not making any progress and falling further behind teams that are making those types of moves.
Mm-hmm. Then the Red Wings home against the New York Rangers Friday at 7:30. The Rangers 19-13-4, 42 points. Same record as the New York Islanders, tied for both wild card spots. They host the Washington Capitals at 8 on NBCSN's Wednesday night rivalry. Capitals, second place in the Metro, 22-13-2 with 46 points. Same record as the Columbus Blue Jackets. But anyhow, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the next opponent, the opponent after that Saturday at 7 at Little Caesars Arena. Penguins, fourth place in the wild card, 18-16-3, 39 points.
Yeah, all teams are better than the Detroit Red Wings, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens this next week. Because if they lose all three of those games...
All teams except Ottawa and Buffalo.
I mean, all teams that are ahead of them in the standings, you lose those games, you just get farther behind, you dig yourself a bigger hole. I don't know what else they need to see to start making moves. It's a little bit early to start doing that kind of stuff. But you got to prepare. You got to get those names out there, because once you start floating around, you get in the other GMs and see what they're thinking, and maybe you can get somebody to bite on something that they might not have done 2 months down the road. So there are teams that are making moves. There's not a ton, but you talk about New Jersey, they make a move. They trade Adam Henrique, he's actually not a bad player, and they get Sammy Vatanen from the Anaheim Ducks, who they weren't going to be able to keep Vatanen with the contracts and the players that they have, so they make the move, and it pays off for both of them. And Henrique adds a little bit of a dimension for scoring that Anaheim was missing, and Sammy Vatanen now is in a place where he'll probably get paid a lot more money than he would have if he would have tried to stay home with Anaheim. So you can't be afraid to make those types of moves, and those are the kind of things that Ken Holland just has not done over the past 6 or 7 years, is make those types of moves that it doesn't make your team better right this second, but it gives you a base for the future, because Sammy Vatanen, I think that New Jersey was doing just fine without him, and losing Adam Henrique took a little bit of their scoring depth away, but it's going to give them another guy that they can sign, and put on the blue line for 5 to 6 years and get some good production out of him. They had to break some eggs a little bit to make an omelet, but that's what you got to do. And they traded Adam Henrique, and now both players are probably going to sign with those clubs at the end of the year.
Speaking of Ken Holland, Jeff Moss, a day after our last episode, wrote an article headlining "Ken Holland keeps digging a deeper hole." John Nio wrote, quote, that Holland's future in Detroit seems just as uncertain, if not more so, with an expiring contract. No apparent talks of an extension for a GM who has been in place for more than 2 decades. And then the Hockey News, Matt Larkin writes, I think the Red Wings are the furthest team away from the Stanley Cup. Moss pointed out Chalowski, Rasmussen. Chalowski got cut, of course. Rasmussen wasn't even invited to compete for the roster. And there were other Tri-City Americans, 47th, 50th, 55th, 121st, and 128 players selected in his draft year made the team. And many Wings and Holland apologists defended the Rasmussen snub by stating that Gabe Velarde didn't make the team either. But that's because Velarde... Yeah, he's hurt, yeah.
He's not playing.
Right.
And the Kings drafted him, who are currently tied for first in the Pacific Division with the Las Vegas Golden Knights. Now the Golden Knights have 3 games in hand, but the Kings drafted Gabe Velarde, and yes, he does get hurt, but it shows right now the Kings don't need him. They'd love to have him probably, but they don't need him. And you got Mike Rasmussen and Dennis Chalowski, who can't even make the World Junior Championship squad. And there's guys that got drafted far lower than they did, same draft class, that are making it and making it with ease. And I think it's hilarious that when you look at the guys that made it, people look at those picks and they say, well, Chalowski wouldn't have made it if so-and-so wasn't there. Or, of course they wouldn't have, because they're better than him. That's why they made the team. That's why he got cut. And to say, I've seen people that have said, well, they had a lot of players that are the same as Chalowski. Okay, but he's not even the best of those group.
No.
That group. Left-handed shooting defensemen, they try to narrow this group into players that are exactly like Chalowski. Well, okay, but he's not even the best one of that group. And he was drafted 20th. He's a first-round draft pick, and he can't even make the first cut. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that, Ken Holland says, well, we got to be good in the draft. Well, you had a chance to, but you failed to do that.
That's what he told TSN 1050 in Toronto. It said, quote, the reality of it is, if we're going to be an elite team, it's really going to happen through the draft, which is not the case.
Which is true if you're going to draft well.
Right.
It's true if you are drafting first or fifth, because the only way you're going to get better is to get guys that are that good to get drafted that high. But at the same token, if you get those picks and you make bad ones, then it's not going to help you at all. And they picked Mike Rasmussen 9th last year when they could have had a pick of other guys. I mean, Owen Tippett was the next pick, and he's playing for Florida this year.
Yeah.
Dennis Chalowski got picked 20th, and then Alex DeBrincat got picked later in that draft. And he's playing for the Hawks, and he's playing significant time. If you have to be good in the draft, which is true, you have to pick good players. Then when you get to those when you get to those spots where you are picking at a higher number, you have to hit on those and not take guys that aren't NHL ready.
Yeah, and then you got...
I mean, it's just baffling.
Yeah.
That's the part that makes no sense. When Ken Holland talks about it, he understands what you have to do. He understands that draft picks are really the meat of your team, because that's how you get better, is because you draft guys. But then when you get to that position, you actually have to draft like that. And I think that over the last 2 seasons, when they've drafted or had a chance to draft NHL-ready players, and they haven't done so, it goes against everything he said there. So for him to come to this realization, well, it's 2 years too late or longer, because you had a chance to draft Gabe Velarde and Jake Chikrin, and you didn't draft either one of them.
Yeah. Then you got Evgeny Svechnikov, languishing in Grand Rapids, scoring 2 goals, picking up 3 assists in 27 games for the Grand Rapids Griffins, and that's not helping either.
No, and they're struggling mightily as well, because they're not the same thing. They're in it to win championships. Well, you're not going to win a lot of championships with a lot of guys who are inexperienced. It's just, that's how it goes. And yes, it is important to win, especially at the minor league level, because a lot of their budget is dependent on attendance. But at the same time, if you're going to watch a team and they're not going to win, the least you can do is throw all those young kids out there and say, well, they're working to get to the NHL and take them to the NHL and bring them up. That's what you do when you have a successful franchise. You're not sticking guys in the AHL for 3 years. You're letting them play there, and as soon as they're ready, you're bringing them up. And they're not even doing that. Hell, they got Anthony Mantha down last year for 15 games.
Yeah.
And they finally brought him up because they had to. I mean, that's really getting to the point now where Ken Holland is talking out of one side of his mouth and doing something else.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beyond frustrating. Like I said, you would hope that he'd make some of those moves, that they start to trade for younger players, and people want that, and people say, yes, we can get younger players, we can get better draft picks. Well, that's great, but when you can't develop those guys or pick the wrong guys, that doesn't work either.
All right. Well, then we got Dylan Sadawi, Joe Hicketts, Philip Hronik, and then Vili Sarajarvi starting the season in Toledo, because Moss guesses the jury is still out on Brian Lashoff, and Hahn also might be losing his mind. He told the TSN 1050 host this, quote, Henrik Zetterberg and Pavel Datsyuk became Zetterberg and Datsyuk when they were 25 and 26 years of age, not when they were 21 and 22. They were just, I think Pav might have been even in Russia. Actually, Datsyuk was already a Stanley Cup champion by the age of 23.
Yeah, he played on the 02 team. What?
Yeah, and Zetterberg played on the 03.
Pavel Datsyuk wasn't an all-star then, but he was on the friggin' power play and playing with Brett Hull his rookie year.
And Boy Devereaux. 2 kids in a go, remember that?
Yeah.
And Ken Holland's not even doing any of the damn homework.
Yeah, I mean, okay, he wasn't the Selke Trophy winner and perennial all-star, but for God's sake, he wasn't playing for Grand Rapids on the 4th line. I mean, he was, it's that kind of stuff that makes me think that he's got himself dug into this hole so deep that he literally just has no way of getting out, and he's just going to continue to do what he's always done because it's a default setting for him. And the one thing I will say about with him is if you're not going to extend him, that doesn't mean that you're going to hire somebody else that's already on staff to be your GM. You've got to clean it up from the bottom up. And we'll see if Chris Ilitch actually does that. He's not prone to do that. But by God, if they're going to make any headway, they're going to have to dig it out from the bottom up because all of the guys that Holland has put in place are his guys. And they think just like he does. So if they want to get better and they want to get progressive, they're going to have to completely change course and dig out the organization from the bottom up and replace them with people who are at least familiar with analytics and understand how the NHL works now, as opposed to when it did when Ken Holland had an empty checkbook, a blank checkbook, and unlimited resources.
Yeah. Then Moss tops it off with a recommendation that the Red Wings' best draft odds, possible to get a franchise defenseman like Sweden's Rasmus Dahlin, who, by the way, will be playing for his home country in Buffalo starting next week, and he doesn't turn 18 until April.
Yeah, they just had their first game today. I mean,
yeah,
he's 17. He's the only 17-year-old on Sweden's roster, and they are the odds-on favorite to win this thing.
Remember when Holland called up Dylan Larkin? And Larkin was not even 20 when he was called up.
No.
And then Holland pulls that 25-26 age crap. Zetterberg and Detzig without even doing a damn bit of the homework.
Well, and the funny thing is, I mean, Dylan Larkin has a great, for him, rookie year.
Yeah.
And then he has the sophomore slump, which is going to happen. I mean, there's very few guys that are able to avoid that. And, you know, people, it's that's what you have to do. You have to learn how to play. You got to throw them in the deep end of the pool sometimes to learn how to swim. And they brought up Dylan Larkin because of his short stint in the AHL. He proved that he was head and shoulders above a lot of the talent that was in that league. There was no reason for him to play in the AHL, so they brought him up in the opening day roster. But you're telling me that he's not going to be who he is until he's 25 and 26? I mean, that's ludicrous.
Yep. So that puts the cherry on top of the sundae. So let's go to 5 questions.
And for 5 questions on the Michigan Sports Truth.
Question number 1. Will Jim Caldwell be fired at the end of the Lions season?
Well, I went off a little bit on that. And should it happen? Probably. I'm going to come out and say that he will, with the caveat that if he doesn't, I am not going to be surprised in the least. Simply because, again, who is it that he's going to be replaced by? And if there aren't any great candidates out there that are knocking down the door, you can't just get rid of him because you want to. You have to find somebody that's going to take him to the next step. And those kind of guys are few and far between. And Bob Quinn has to hit on this coaching hire because he is at the point now where he's got some guys that are on the back end as far as longevity is in the NFL. You start to regress at the age of 30 or a little bit older. And he's got a lot of guys that are linchpins of his franchise that are nearing that age or above that age. So if he's going to fire Caldwell and hire a new coach, he's going to have to find somebody that is going to take them to the next step and do it post-haste because there's not a lot of time for them to monkey around and find their way with a new coach. So the long-form question, or the long-form answer to that, my short-form answer is yes, he will be.
All right. Yep. Me too.
Next question.
My answer exactly. Question number 2. Do the Lions still have a chance to sweep the Packers in the season series, except just for keeps, now that they've been eliminated?
Well, absolutely. The Packers are really down this year. Of course, Aaron Rodgers going out doesn't help, but their defense hasn't been that great. And if you're the Lions, you should win this game just on pure talent alone on paper. So I'm going to say that they win this game just because of the fact that even if Jim Caldwell coaches to his normal ability, they should be able to beat the Packers. They pantsed at Lambeau, and they really haven't gotten any better since then. So I'm going to say the Lions are going to win this game.
I predict 13-10. Lions win.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Right.
Next question.
Question number 3. Should the Central Michigan Chippewas have done better against the Wyoming Cowboys in the Idaho Potato Bowl?
Should they have done better? Yes. They should have turned the ball over 8 times. it's one of those things where when you're playing in a bowl, you don't think of Boise, Idaho as a bowl destination. So maybe a little of that set in. Wyoming, obviously, much more used to those type of elements. Playing an outdoor game in December in a winter climate such as Boise. That said, Central Michigan really pooped the bed, and yes, they should have played better. I don't know if they would have beat Wyoming, but they certainly didn't give themselves any chance of doing that in the first half with multiple turnovers.
That said, Josh Allen overcame adversity by overcoming his shoulder injury and on his throwing arm, and he proved to be an NFL draftee. So, that being said,
Next question.
Question number 4: How long or short will Pistons starting point guard Reggie Jackson be out with his sprained right ankle? I'd say close to a week.
Yeah, it's really going to depend on the severity of the sprain. It didn't look great when it happened. If you look at the frame by frame, ankles aren't supposed to move that way. And having sprained my ankle a couple of times myself, I'm not a world-class athlete by any stretch of the imagination. Took me about 6 weeks to get back in shape the first time, and it took me about 3 weeks to get back the second time. So that said, Reggie Jackson is a 37-year-old man, and he's in definitely better shape than I am. So I would think that probably 1 to 2 weeks for him. But they also have to be cautious because they don't want to lose him for an extended period of time by rushing him back. So they may hold him out a little bit longer, depending on how they're doing, to make sure he's fully healed. So I would say 1 to 2 weeks, but it wouldn't surprise me if it went past that, simply because they want him to be 100% for the stretch run.
Mm-hmm.
Next question.
And finally, question number 5. Could this finally be the end for Red Wings general manager Ken Holland? Remember, John Niall wrote, Holland has an expiring contract with no talks of an extension whatsoever. And Holland still doesn't do any of the homework. That's got to be the end.
Yeah, and when you talk about guys that are writing, you look at the Lions beat writers, and almost unanimously they've said that Jim Caldwell should be fired. And you look at the Red Wings beat writers, and they're talking about, I don't know what they're talking about because I really don't read them because they're all really useless at this point. That said, somebody that's in the know is talking about them not having extensions, and there hasn't been no mention by anybody, even the slappiest of beat writers, has not mentioned Holland's extension or anything remotely close to him having talks about going past this season. So I will believe it when I see it, but I would have to believe that if there's any better time to do so, it's right now when they're at their lowest point. And for Chris Ilitch to continue to have faith in him would just show that he really just doesn't care, because he's got a brand new building and ain't nobody showing up to watch that kind of hockey. I don't care what anybody says. You get to year 2, year 3, and they're still having 60, 70-point seasons. Nobody's coming. I ain't paying $40 to park and $120 to get into the game just to watch that. So, that said, I think this truly is the end. And for them to move ahead from this, they really have to dig out the entire root system that Ken Holland has built over his 20-plus years as GM, which is clean everybody out from the top down and start all over, because you're really going to have to change the direction and the thinking of this franchise if they want to compete in today's NHL, because they are doing everything that they can not to, and they're going to have to do almost everything the exact opposite if they want to get back into the NHL league. It's not going to be a quick process at all, but it can be accelerated by drafting well, making good moves, and having much better talent evaluation that they currently do have.
So that wraps up our 5-question segment. And to our entire audience, if you want to answer those 5 questions, just replay that segment portion of this episode and answer them the best you can without going on a line.
Pencils down, everyone. It's time to find out what's your grade.
Only one event to grade. The Central Michigan Chippewas and their university signing head football coach John Bonamego to a 5-year extension. I'd grade that at least a B+.
Yeah, I'm going to go A- on that. And I talked about that when it did happen in our last episode, that Central, they are what they are. They're not going to be a national power. Their ceiling is probably a MAC championship game, and perhaps a little bit higher bowl than the Idaho Potato Bowl. And John Bonamego has done a pretty good job with them. They went 8-4 this year, which was a little bit surprising given how they played, and really their performances at home were pretty bad. But they beat a couple of good teams on the road, and they were able to win one game at home, which meant something, and that was the last game of the regular season. So some building blocks there. And the other thing for Central is if you're a guy looking to play for a school, maybe not a Power 5 school, but you're looking for a good, solid program to play for, the last thing you want is a coach that's destined to go somewhere else. What I mean by that is you look at Fort Atlantic. It's got to be really hard for Lane Kiffin to recruit because nobody thinks he's going to stay there very long. All he has to do is prove himself, and somebody's going to hand him a fat contract at a Power 5 school and see if he can't do it again. So when you're recruiting down there in the mid-major regions, so to speak, you have to have some continuity. And if you can promise a kid that you're going to be there, at least that you can try your best to be there, Central Michigan kind of telling everybody that John Bonamego's their guy. They enjoy how he runs their program. They think he does a good job. And it's really easier to recruit when you can do that kind of stuff. John Bonamego is not looking for the next big job. He's pretty content at Central Michigan. And I don't think that teams are going to be on the hunt for a guy like that. He's an older guy. He's had a couple of health issues, and that shouldn't really play into him getting hired or not. But it really just all kind of adds up to he's going to be there unless he really falls off the deep end, and that will help him in recruiting, which means they'll get a couple notch above what they might be able to get otherwise, and be able to build a solid program. So I'm going to give it an A- because it just shows that Central Michigan is committed to where they're at right now, which is a higher level MAC school. And like I said, their ceiling is probably winning a MAC division title and maybe getting to a little bit bigger name bowl.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So that's our What's Your Grade segments. So for our audience, if they have a grade for each event, post it in the comment bank in this episode, and please don't go out of line. Before we sign off, I want to remind everyone to share this episode and our entire podcast on social media. Have their friends share it as well, because we want to tell them that the Michigan Sports Truth podcast is searching for a wider local audience that is fans of sports. So please spread the word about the Michigan Sports Truth podcast and its Facebook page. Buck, I wish you a happy new year. Very explanatory and excellent job as always every year. I'll talk to you next week.
Yes, sir. You have a good New Year as well.
Thanks. So, I hope our audience has a happy New Year. I hope they had a very Merry Christmas as well. So, that being said, I'm Taylor Phillips. Follow me on Twitter at DT2Phillips and Buck Geno at BuckGeno3rd. And like and share the Michigan Sports Truth Facebook page. We'll talk to you next week on episode 297. And thanks very much for listening, downloading, and sharing TTFN. Ta-ta for now.
Transmission complete.